February 14, 2019, the safe house in Culiacan. Miguel Santos had his Glock pressed against El Chapo's temple when the sniper's bullet tore through the drug lord's neck. Blood everywhere. Chapo down. Mission complete. Except Miguel didn't pull the trigger. For 4 years, Miguel told himself that night went exactly as planned. The DEA got their man. Justice was served. Case closed. Then Rosa Martinez walked into his cantina with a photograph that changed everything. Same safe house, same night, same blood on the walls. But in her picture, El Chapo was standing, smiling, very much alive. The bullet hole in the wall behind him was fake. The blood was stage makeup, and Miguel Santos, 15-year DEA veteran, had been played. Someone orchestrated the whole thing. Someone wanted the world to believe Chapo was vulnerable when he was actually untouchable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Miguel's hands shook as he stared at the photograph Rosa had placed on the scarred wooden bar. The cantina's ceiling fan wheezed overhead, casting shifting shadows across the image that made Chapo's smile seem to move. "Where did you get this?" His voice came out rougher than intended. Rosa sat perfectly still on the bar stool, her dark eyes never leaving his face. She was maybe 25, with the kind of weathered beauty that spoke of hard miles. "From the man who took it. That's impossible. Everyone in that room is dead. Are they?" Miguel's mind raced back to that February night. The safe house had been compromised within minutes of the shooting. His partner Danny Reeves caught 3 bullets to the chest trying to extract them. Miguel had dragged Chapo's bleeding body to the van, administered first aid, called it in. The kingpin died en route to the hospital, or so the reports said. "You don't remember me, do you?" Rosa's fingers traced the rim of her untouched beer bottle. "Should I? My mother was Carmen Vega, Mazatlan, 2004. The name hit him like a punch to the solar plexus. Carmen, the waitress from the Hotel Playa with the infectious laugh and eyes that held secrets. Their 3-week affair had been a mistake, a moment of weakness during his first deep cover assignment in Sinaloa. When she tried to contact him months later, his handler had relocated him to Guadalajara. Clean break, no complications. Carmen never mentioned. "She died giving birth to me." Rosa's voice carried no emotion, just facts. "Raised by my grandmother until she passed last year. Found your letters in an old shoebox." Miguel felt the familiar burn of tequila phantom taste on his tongue. He'd been sober for 3 years, but moments like this made his fingers itch for a bottle. "What do you want?" Instead of answering, Rosa pulled out a second photograph. This one showed Miguel himself, standing outside the cantina just this morning. A red circle was drawn around his head in what looked like blood. "Someone's been watching you," she said. "Same someone who's been asking questions about Carmen's daughter." The cantina's front door chimed, and Miguel's hand instinctively moved toward the .38 he kept beneath the register. But it was just old Esteban, shuffling in for his daily beer and dominoes. Miguel nodded to the regular, then leaned closer to Rosa. "Who's asking?" "Americans, 3 of them. Showed up in Culiacan 2 weeks ago, flashing DEA badges that looked real enough. But when I called the number on their card, the line was disconnected." Miguel's blood turned to ice water. The DEA had officially closed his file when he'd resigned after the Chapo operation. Clean record, full pension, handshake goodbye. They had no reason to be sniffing around his past. What did they ask? "About you, about Carmen, about what she might have told me before she died." Rosa's facade finally cracked, revealing something vulnerable underneath. "They wanted to know if you'd ever mentioned the safe house operation." "I never told Carmen anything operational." "I know, because you were never really DEA, were you?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Miguel stared at this woman, his daughter, Christ, and felt 15 years of certainty crumble beneath his feet. "That's crazy." Rosa reached into her jacket and Miguel tensed, but she only produced a manila envelope. 6 months ago, I started digging into my father's background, military records, employment history, the works. She slid the envelope across the bar. "Funny thing about Miguel Santos, DEA agent. He died in Afghanistan in 2003. Improvised explosive device outside Kandahar. Miguel's vision tunneled. The envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The man who took Carmen to bed in 2004 was using a dead man's identity. That's not, I have memories. Training at Quantico. My first handler, Richards. The apartment in Mexico City where they briefed me. Do you? Or do you have someone else's memories? The cantina spun slightly. Miguel gripped the bar's edge until his knuckles went white. Memory implantation is science fiction bullshit. Is it? Rosa's voice was gentle now, almost pitying. Because, according to these records, the real Miguel Santos was 5'6" and left-handed. Miguel looked down at his right hand, the hand that had held the Glock against Chapo's temple, the hand that had written those letters to Carmen, the hand that was currently trembling like an old drunk's. Outside, a black SUV with tinted windows cruised slowly past the cantina's front window. They found us, Rosa whispered. The vehicle stopped. 3 doors opened in unison. Miguel reached for his gun as the cantina's front door exploded inward. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're diving deep into Miguel's fractured memories, and I promise you won't see what's coming next. Drop a comment below and let me know. Do you think Miguel's memories are real, or has someone been playing puppet master with his mind for decades? Time fractured into crystalline shards as the cantina door burst open. Miguel's hand found the 38 feet's grip, muscle memory overriding the chaos in his skull. 3 figures in tactical gear flooded through the entrance, weapons raised, moving with the fluid precision of operators who'd done this dance 1,000 times before. Down, everyone down. Old Esteban dropped his beer bottle, the glass exploding against the tile floor in a spray of amber and foam. The elderly man's hands shot skyward, his weathered face a mask of terror. Miguel's world narrowed to the immediate threat. 15 years of whatever training, real or implanted, taking control. Behind the bar, he hissed to Rosa, noting how she moved without hesitation, no civilian panic in her eyes. Interesting. The lead operator wore a black ski mask, but his voice carried a slight Boston accent that tickled something in Miguel's fragmented memory. Miguel Santos, step away from the weapon and keep your hands visible. Which Miguel Santos are you looking for? The words left his mouth before he could stop them. The manila envelope with the dead soldier's record still lay on the bar, its contents a ticking bomb in his peripheral vision. Cute. The one who's been running this shithole cantina for 15 years pretending to be a retired DEA agent. The operator's weapon, a tactical shotgun with all the bells and whistles, never wavered from Miguel's chest. The one who let Joaquin Guzman walk away from a sanctioned kill order. Miguel's finger found the trigger guard of his. 38, but he kept the weapon low. 3 against 1 with his daughter, Christ, his daughter, crouched behind the bar like this was just another Tuesday. How was she so calm? Chapo died that night. I have the death certificate. Do you? The operator's head tilted slightly. Or do you have another carefully crafted lie, just like everything else in your file? The cantina's ceiling fan continued its lazy rotation, utterly indifferent to the standoff unfolding below. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through windows Miguel had cleaned that morning, back when his biggest worry was whether to order more Dos Equis for the weekend rush. Who are you working for? Miguel asked. Same people you've been working for your whole life. You just never knew it. Rosa's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He's telling the truth, isn't he? She rose slowly from behind the bar, hands visible but unafraid. My father really has been a puppet this whole time. The second operator shifted his stance, and Miguel caught a glimpse of a distinctive scar running from his left ear to his jaw. Military, special forces maybe, the kind of scar you got from shrapnel or a knife that came too close to taking your head off. Smart girl, the lead operator said. Smarter than her old man, apparently. Took him 15 years to start asking the right questions. Miguel's mind raced through fragments of memory, or what he'd believed were memories. The briefings in Mexico City. His handler Richards, a thin man with nicotine-stained fingers who always smelled like cigarettes and paranoia. The Quantico training facility where he'd learned to field strip a Glock in 12 seconds. Were any of those moments real? The night Chapo was shot, Miguel said slowly. You were there. We were all there. The operator's weapon lowered slightly. Question is, do you remember any of our faces? Or did they scrub those memories clean too? A flash, sudden, violent, erupted behind Miguel's eyes. The safe house, Chapo bleeding on the floor. But now there were other figures in the room, shadows he'd never noticed before. Men in tactical gear who moved like ghosts, watching, waiting. Fucking hell, he whispered. Starting to come back? The operator pulled off his ski mask, revealing a face Miguel recognized but couldn't place. Square jaw, steel gray eyes, the kind of face that belonged in government photos marked classified. Name's Patterson. I was your babysitter for 8 years. Made sure you stayed in character, didn't ask too many questions. Miguel's free hand found the bar's edge again. The wood felt real enough, scarred and stained by 15 years of spilled drinks and honest sweat. But if his memories were lies, if his entire identity was someone else's construct, what did real even mean anymore? Carmen, he said quietly. Was she part of it too? Rosa's sharp intake of breath was answer enough. Honey trap, Patterson confirmed. We needed you emotionally invested in staying in Mexico. Carmen was enthusiastic about the assignment, until she got pregnant and started asking for more money. The .38 felt impossibly heavy in Miguel's hand. Everything he'd built, everyone he'd loved, every choice he'd made, all of it orchestrated by puppet masters whose faces he was only now beginning to remember. What do you want? He asked. Patterson smiled, and Miguel recognized the expression from a dozen half-remembered briefings. Same thing we've always wanted, Miguel, for you to finish the job. Outside, more vehicles were arriving. The sound of engines filled the street outside, not just cars, but the distinctive rumble of armored vehicles. Miguel counted at least 3 more, maybe 4. Whatever this was, Patterson's people weren't taking chances. What job? Miguel's voice sounded strange to his own ears, like he was hearing himself through water. Chapo's been dead for... Has he? Patterson gestured to one of his men, who immediately moved to secure the cantina's back exit. That's the beautiful thing about memory modification, Miguel. We can make you believe whatever serves the mission. And the mission required Joaquin Guzman to disappear, not die. Rosa stood frozen behind the bar, her face pale but her eyes sharp, calculating. The photograph I showed you, the one from that night, it wasn't taken by someone who's dead, was it? Patterson's smile widened. Your daughter's putting the pieces together faster than you are. Disappointing, considering what we invested in your training. A memory fragment exploded behind Miguel's eyes. Not gentle this time, but violent, like someone driving a spike through his skull. He was in a white room with no windows, electrodes attached to his temples, a voice speaking in measured tones. Your name is Miguel Santos. You were born in El Paso, Texas. Your father worked construction. Your mother died when you were 12. But underneath that voice, fainter, another memory struggled to surface. A different name, a different life. A woman's voice calling him David. The word escaped his lips in a whisper. Patterson's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features. Now that's interesting. The conditioning shouldn't be breaking down this quickly. My name is David. The certainty struck him like lightning. David Morrison. I was Army intelligence before. The memory slammed shut like a door, leaving him gasping. Before we recruited you for the shadow cabinet, Patterson finished. Before we gave you a new identity, a new purpose, a new set of memories to keep you functional in the field. Old Esteban, still cowering in the corner, began muttering prayers under his breath. The sound grounded Miguel, David, whoever the hell he was, in the present moment. This cantina, this life, the last 15 years of serving drinks and pretending to be haunted by a failed DEA operation. All of it, a carefully constructed lie. Why? The question tore from his throat. Why me? Why the elaborate setup? Because you were perfect, Patterson said, checking his watch. Army intelligence background, no close family, psychologically compatible with memory restructuring. And because Joaquin Guzman needed to trust someone completely before he could be properly leveraged, Rosa's voice cut through the explanation like broken glass. Leveraged for what? Patterson's attention shifted to her, and Miguel saw something predatory in the man's eyes. Your father didn't just save Chapo's life that night. He helped orchestrate the Kingpin's evolution from regional drug lord to global power broker. Every connection, every alliance, every strategic decision, all guided by the intelligence David fed him over 8 years of deep cover. The cantina spun around Miguel as more pieces clicked into place. Not just the safe house operation, but years of meetings, conversations, advice he'd given to cartel leaders while posing as a corrupt ex-DEA agent. He hadn't been investigating the Sinaloa organization. He'd been shaping it. The Americans asking about me in Culiacan, Rosa said slowly. They weren't DEA either. Competing interests, Patterson confirmed. The Shadow Cabinet has enemies, and those enemies have finally figured out what we accomplished here. They want Chapo's location, and they think you're the key to finding him. I don't know where, Miguel started. David does. Patterson pulled a small device from his tactical vest, something that looked like a cross between a smartphone and a medical scanner. The real David Morrison, buried under 15 years of Miguel Santos conditioning. He knows exactly where Joaquin Guzman has been hiding because he helped design the exit strategy. Outside, the vehicles had stopped. Doors were slamming. Footsteps approached the cantina from multiple directions. Here's what's going to happen, Patterson continued, his weapon trained on Miguel while his men covered Rosa and Esteban. We're going to trigger a full memory restoration. David's going to remember his real mission parameters, and then he's going to help us complete the operation he started 20 years ago. Miguel's hand tightened on the .38. And if I refuse? Patterson's gaze flicked to Rosa. Your daughter dies, the old man dies, and we flood this cantina with enough fentanyl gas to kill everything in a 6-block radius. The cantina's front window exploded inward as a smoke grenade landed on the floor between the tables. But this wasn't Patterson's team. The tactical formation was all wrong, and Miguel caught a glimpse of different uniforms through the haze. Shit, Patterson snarled. They found us faster than expected. Automatic weapons fire erupted from the street. Patterson and his men dove for cover as bullets shredded the cantina's walls. Miguel grabbed Rosa's hand. Everything he'd believed about his life was a lie, but one thing remained crystal clear. He would die before letting anyone hurt his daughter. The world exploded into chaos. Miguel yanked Rosa toward the cantina's back room as automatic weapons fire shredded the air where they'd been standing. Plaster rained from the ceiling, and the ancient jukebox sparked and died as bullets punched through its chrome facade. Patterson and his team had scattered, professional training overriding whatever agenda they'd brought to Miguel's door. But these weren't amateurs shooting up his cantina. The tactical formation was textbook, suppressing fire from multiple angles while a breach team moved on the building's weak points. Miguel recognized the pattern because somewhere in his fractured memory, he'd been trained to execute it. The storage room, he shouted to Rosa over the gunfire. There's a tunnel that connects to the pharmacy next door. She nodded without question, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd anticipated violence. That should have surprised him, but nothing about this day made sense anymore. His daughter, if she really was his daughter, handled combat like she'd been born to it. Old Esteban wasn't so fortunate. The elderly man lay crumpled near the dominoes table. Whether from a bullet or his failing heart, Miguel couldn't tell. There was no time to check. Patterson appeared beside them, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Back exits compromised. They've got the whole block surrounded. Who's they? Miguel demanded, but Patterson was already moving, his weapon tracking the cantina's shattered front entrance. The people who want your memories intact, Rosa answered instead. The ones who think you can lead them to Chapo. A flashbang grenade rolled through the broken window. Miguel closed his eyes and opened his mouth just as the world went white and silent. Military training, real or implanted, kicked in automatically. When his vision cleared, 3 figures in tactical gear were advancing through the smoke. These weren't Patterson's people. Different uniforms, different weapons, and they moved with the cold efficiency of operators who'd never learned to pull their punches. Miguel caught a glimpse of Cyrillic lettering on one man's vest before Patterson opened fire from behind an overturned table. Russian. Why were Russians shooting up his cantina? Felt pathetic compared to the military hardware filling his bar with lead and cordite, but he put 2 round center mass into the nearest operator. The man stumbled but didn't go down. Body armor. Professional grade. David Morrison, one of the Russians called out in accented English. "We know you're here. Come out and the girl lives." Rosa's grip on his arm tightened. "They want you alive." "For now," Miguel muttered. His mind raced through escape routes, tactical options, anything that might get them out of this alive. But every scenario ended the same way. Too many shooters, too much firepower, nowhere to run. Another memory fragment stabbed through his skull. Himself in a windowless room, learning to resist interrogation. A voice explaining pressure points, stress positions, chemical enhancement techniques. Military intelligence hadn't just trained him to gather information. They'd prepared him to protect it. The device Patterson had, Rosa said suddenly. The memory scanner. If these Russians get their hands on it, she didn't need to finish. Whatever secrets were buried in David Morrison's skull, people were willing to kill for them. And judging by the firepower currently ventilating his cantina, they weren't planning to ask nicely. Patterson combat rolled toward their position, his tactical vest torn and bloody. "We need to move. Now. My extraction team is 3 minutes out, but these Spetsnaz fucks won't wait that long." Spetsnaz? Miguel's blood turned to ice water. Russian special forces meant this operation had state backing. What the hell did I do that has Moscow sending wet work teams after me? "You helped build a drug empire that threatened their European markets," Patterson panted. "Guzman's organization controls half the world's cocaine supply, and it's cutting into their trafficking revenues. They want the kingpin's location, and they think you're the key." More gunfire erupted from the street. Miguel heard the distinctive whine of ricochets, the meaty thump of bullets finding flesh. Someone was screaming in Russian. There, Rosa pointed toward the cantina's back wall. "That cabinet. It's not flush with the wall." Miguel looked where she indicated and felt another memory surface. Not his memory, but David Morrison's. This building had been a safe house during the Revolution, and revolutionaries always built escape routes. He put his shoulder against the cabinet and heaved. The heavy wooden piece scraped aside, revealing a narrow passage that led into darkness. The air smelled like mold and decades-old fear. "How did you know?" Patterson demanded, but Rosa was already moving toward the hidden tunnel. Miguel grabbed the memory device from Patterson's vest and followed his daughter into the blackness. Behind them, the Russians were shouting orders, closing in on their position. But as they crawled through the revolutionary tunnel, Miguel couldn't shake the feeling that Rosa had known about the passage before she'd spotted it. Just like she'd known exactly how to move under fire. His daughter was keeping secrets, and in his fractured state, that scared him more than the Russians. The tunnel stretched ahead like a throat leading to hell. Miguel crawled through the suffocating darkness, his knees scraping against rough stone while the memory device pressed against his ribs like a cancer. Behind them, the Russians had found the hidden passage, their flashlight beams cut through the blackness, accompanied by the sound of boots on stone. "How much further?" Patterson wheezed. Blood from his head wound dripped onto Miguel's hand. Rosa's voice floated back from ahead, unnaturally calm. 50 meters, maybe 60. Miguel's chest tightened. "How do you know the distance?" She didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. In the span of an hour, his daughter had demonstrated tactical awareness that took years to develop, identified escape routes in a building she'd supposedly never seen before, and now navigated Revolutionary-era tunnels like she'd mapped them herself. A memory, not his own, but belonging to David Morrison, clawed its way to the surface. A briefing room in Langley, a woman's photograph on the table, the handler's voice. "She's been in play for 3 years, speaks perfect Spanish, handles weapons like a pro. Most importantly, she believes every word of her cover story." "Rosa." Miguel's voice cracked like old leather. "Stop." She froze ahead of him in the tunnel. Her breathing had barely changed despite their desperate flight. Another tell that should have been obvious. "Turn around," he whispered. Slowly, when she faced him, even in the darkness, he could see the shift in her expression. The frightened daughter act had evaporated, replaced by something cold and professional. "When did you figure it out?" she asked. Miguel felt something die inside his chest. Not hope, because he'd lost that years ago, but the possibility of redemption. "You're not my daughter." "No, I'm not." Patterson cursed behind them, but Miguel barely heard it. The weight of this new betrayal crushed down on him like the tunnel walls themselves. Another lie, another manipulation, another person he'd allowed himself to care about, revealed as just another player in someone else's game. Carmen, he said. She was never pregnant. Carmen was a honey trap, like Patterson said, but she served her purpose. Rosa's voice carried no emotion now, just clinical detachment. The shadow cabinet needed you invested in staying in Mexico. A dead wife and abandoned daughter gave you the perfect motivation. The Russian voices grew closer. Miguel could hear them arguing in their native language, probably debating whether to take him alive or settle for his corpse. "So what are you?" Miguel asked. "CIA? FSB? Some other alphabet soup agency I've never heard of?" "I work for the people who want David Morrison's memories intact." She produced a pistol from somewhere. When had she armed herself? The same people currently shooting up your cantina. Patterson tried to raise his weapon, but Rosa put 2 rounds in his chest before he could clear leather. The sound echoed through the tunnel like thunder, and Patterson's body went limp. Miguel stared at the corpse of his supposed handler. The Russians. The Russians are useful idiots. This operation goes much deeper than Moscow. Rosa kept her weapon trained on him while reaching for Patterson's body. She pulled something from his vest, a second memory device smaller than the one Miguel carried. "There are players in this game that make the shadow cabinet look like amateurs." The Russian voices stopped arguing. They'd heard the gunshots. "You could have taken the device from Patterson back at the cantina," Miguel realized. "Why go through this charade?" "Because I needed you to remember fragments naturally. Forced memory extraction is messy. We lose details, context, emotional associations. But when memories surface organically, triggered by stress and familiar surroundings, they come back complete." Miguel thought about the flashes he'd experienced. His real name, fragments of training, pieces of operations he'd helped orchestrate. Each revelation had felt like someone driving spikes through his brain, but they'd been vivid, detailed, accurate. "You've been triggering my memories since you walked into the cantina." Every word was calculated to crack your conditioning. The photograph, the story about Carmen's pregnancy, even the Russians showing up right on schedule. She smiled, and Miguel saw his own tactical coldness reflected in her expression. "You've been remembering David Morrison all day, piece by piece." The reality of his situation crystallized like ice in his veins. He wasn't just a victim of manipulation, he was still being manipulated. Rosa, Patterson, the shadow cabinet, the Russians, everyone who'd entered his cantina today had been dancing to someone else's choreography. "Who's really pulling the strings?" he asked. "The same organization that's been running you for 20 years. The one that convinced you that your memories were implanted, when the truth is much simpler." Her smile widened. "Miguel Santos was the lie, David. You've been David Morrison all along. You just forgot voluntarily." The tunnel exploded with muzzle flashes as the Russians opened fire. Miguel threw himself against the tunnel wall as bullets sparked off stone where his head had been. Rosa moved like liquid mercury, rolling away from the gunfire while returning precise shots that sent the Russians scrambling for cover. But in the strobing muzzle flashes, Miguel caught something that made his blood freeze. She was smiling. Not the grim determination of someone fighting for their life. Pure, predatory satisfaction. Like a chess master watching the final pieces fall into place. "You forgot voluntarily," she'd said. The words echoed in his skull louder than the gunfire. David Morrison hadn't been conditioned by the shadow cabinet. He'd chosen to forget. Another memory fragment tore through his consciousness like shrapnel, himself in a medical chair, electrodes attached to his temples. But no restraints, no coercion. A doctor asking, "Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" And his own voice, calm and decided, "Erase it all. Every mission, every operation, every goddamn thing I've done for them." "Jesus Christ," Miguel whispered. The Russians were advancing, using suppressing fire to close the distance. Rosa emptied her magazine and rolled behind Patterson's corpse for cover. "David, I need you to remember the extraction protocols. How do we get out of here?" But Miguel wasn't thinking about escape routes anymore. He was remembering a briefing room 20 years ago. A target photograph on the table, not Joaquin Guzman, but a 12-year-old girl with Rosa's eyes. A voice explaining the mission parameters. "She's Guzman's niece. the cartel king's emotional weak point. We turn her, train her, and eventually she delivers him to us. "You're Elena Guzman," he breathed. Rosa's tactical mask slipped for just an instant, surprise flickering across her features before the professional coldness returned. Clever. Most of that conditioning really is gone, isn't it? I turned you. The memory was crystal clear now, horrible in its completeness. When you were 12 years old, I helped orchestrate your recruitment. We made you believe your uncle abandoned you, that your parents died because of his enemies. We turned you against your own family. She reloaded with mechanical precision. The best operatives are created in childhood. Give a child the right trauma at the right time, and they'll spend their whole life trying to earn the love that was taken from them. Miguel felt sick, not from the gunpowder smoke filling the tunnel, but from the recognition of his own handiwork. David Morrison hadn't just helped build Guzman's empire. He'd weaponized the man's own niece against him. 20 years, he said. You've been hunting your uncle for 20 years, and you don't even remember why you started. I remember enough. Her voice carried decades of carefully nurtured hatred. I remember him letting my parents die. I remember being abandoned, forgotten, left to survive on the streets while he built his criminal empire. None of that was real. Miguel's throat felt like sandpaper. We implanted those memories. Your parents died in a car accident. Guzman wasn't even in the country. He's been searching for you ever since, thinking you were kidnapped or killed. The Russian voices were getting closer, but Rosa had gone very still. You're lying. I wish I were. Miguel pulled the memory device from his vest. This isn't just about extracting information. It's about completing the operation I designed 20 years ago. You were never meant to capture Guzman. You were meant to destroy him from the inside. Make him trust you, love you like the daughter he never had, then put a bullet in his brain when his guard was down. Something cracked in Rosa's expression. Not the tactical mask, but something deeper. The conditioning that had shaped her entire adult life. My uncle is a monster. He destroys everything he touches. Your uncle is a drug dealer, Elena. A criminal, yes, but not the monster we made you believe he was. Miguel's voice gentled despite the bullets still flying around them. The real monster was the organization that stole a 12-year-old girl and spent 20 years turning her into a weapon. Stop calling me that name. But her voice wavered now, uncertainty creeping in. Miguel understood why David Morrison had chosen to forget. The weight of what he'd done, not just to Guzman, but to an innocent child, would have driven him insane. Better to become Miguel Santos, haunted bartender, than live with the knowledge of the lives he'd destroyed. Rosa raised her weapon, but her hands were shaking. You're trying to manipulate me, like you manipulated everyone else. I'm trying to tell you the truth. For the first time in 20 years. Miguel looked into her eyes and saw the scared child she'd once been, buried under layers of training and trauma. Your real name is Elena Beatriz Guzman. You have a birthmark on your left shoulder shaped like a crescent moon. Your favorite food was churros with cinnamon, and your uncle has spent 2 decades searching for you, hoping you're still alive. The gun in Rosa's hands began to tremble violently. Behind them, a Russian voice called out in perfect English, touching reunion. But playtime's over. Miguel turned toward the Russian voice, but kept his eyes on Rosa, Elena, watching decades of conditioning war with fragments of buried truth. The gun in her hands wavered between him and the approaching footsteps. Step away from the girl, Morrison, the Russian continued. His English carried the crisp precision of military academy training. She's coming with us. Like hell she is, Miguel said. But even as the words left his mouth, he realized the terrible irony. He was protecting a weapon he'd helped forge from the very people who'd probably contracted its creation. Elena's face cycled through emotions like a broken slideshow, confusion, rage, desperate hope, then back to the cold mask she'd worn for 20 years. The birthmark, she whispered. How could you know about the birthmark? Miguel's memory supplied the answer with crystalline clarity. A medical file, age 12. Distinguishing features noted for identification purposes. But alongside that clinical data came something else. David Morrison sitting in a Mexico City hotel room, staring at surveillance photos of a laughing child and wondering what kind of man he'd become. Because I was there when they cataloged every detail of your life before they stole it, he said. I watched them map your personality, your fears, your loves, everything they'd need to rebuild you into their perfect asset. The Russian footsteps stopped just outside the range of their flashlight beams. Miguel could hear whispered conversation, tactical planning. They were taking their time because they knew their targets were trapped. "You're David Morrison," Elena said, and it wasn't a question anymore. "The architect. My handler always spoke about you like you were a ghost story." "Your handler." Miguel felt another piece click into place. "Let me guess. Goes by Control, never shows his real face, speaks with a slight accent that could be from anywhere." Her sharp intake of breath confirmed it. "That's because he's not one person. Control is a rotation of handlers from different agencies, all answering to the same shadow organization." Miguel leaned against the tunnel wall, suddenly exhausted by the weight of his returning memories. "The same organization that's been running me since I was younger than you. Impossible. You chose to forget." "I chose to forget what they let me remember choosing to forget." The words felt like broken glass in his throat. "Elena, what if the memory of voluntarily erasing my past is just another implant? What if David Morrison is as much a construction as Miguel Santos?" The Russian voices stopped whispering. Miguel caught the soft scrape of equipment being readied. Elena's gun hand steadied, but now it was pointed at the darkness behind them. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because in about 30 seconds, those Russians are going to try to take us both alive, and I need you to decide who you really are, the weapon they made you into or the woman you might have been." Miguel pulled Patterson's backup pistol from the corpse. "Either way, I'm done running from what I've done." "The tunnel splits ahead," Elena said quietly. 20 meters. You can reach it before they get a clear shot." Miguel looked at her, really looked, and saw something that made his chest tight. Not the cold professional who'd executed Patterson, not the confused young woman learning about stolen memories, but someone making a choice that would define the rest of her life. "What about you?" he asked. "I have questions only they can answer." She glanced at the memory device in his hands. "And you have information they need. We're more valuable apart than together." The tactical logic was sound, but Miguel found himself reluctant to leave her. Not because she was the daughter he'd never had, but because she was the victim of his greatest failure. Walking away now felt like abandoning her twice. "Elena." "My name is Rosa," she said firmly. "Elena Guzman died 20 years ago. But maybe Rosa can learn to live with what Elena's killers made her do." The Russians moved with military precision, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like sword strikes. Miguel saw 3 figures in tactical gear, but something nagged at him. Their positioning was wrong, too spread out for tunnel fighting. "They're hurting us," he realized. Elena nodded grimly, toward the split. "They know about the tunnel layout," which meant this wasn't a pursuit. It was an orchestrated manipulation, just like everything else. Someone wanted them to reach that junction, wanted them to separate, wanted Miguel alone with his recovered memories. "The shadow cabinet," Elena said, coming to the same conclusion. "They're not trying to capture us. They're completing the operation." Miguel gripped the memory device tighter. 20 years of lies, manipulation, and carefully orchestrated trauma, all building toward this moment in a revolutionary tunnel beneath Mazatlan. But for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt something like clarity. David Morrison had been a weapon. Miguel Santos had been a mask. But the man standing here now, about to make his final choice, was neither. He was something new. The Russians opened fire. The muzzle flashes turned the tunnel into a strobing nightmare. Miguel dove left as Elena rolled right, their separation exactly what the Russians had orchestrated. But as concrete chips exploded around him, Miguel felt something unexpected. Not the tactical calculations of David Morrison or the desperate fear of Miguel Santos, but a cold, purposeful rage that belonged entirely to the man he was choosing to become. He came up firing not at the Russians but at the tunnel's support beams above them. 20 years of buried memories had returned with perfect clarity, including the architectural surveys David Morrison had studied before designing this operation. Revolutionary tunnels, hastily dug, structurally compromised. The first beam cracked with a sound like thunder. "You magnificent bastard," Elena breathed from across the tunnel, understanding immediately. She shifted her fire to the opposite support, her shots precise despite the chaos. The Russians realized the danger too late. They tried to retreat, but Miguel had already triggered a controlled collapse. Tons of debris crashed down between them and their pursuers, sealing off the tunnel behind a wall of broken stone. In the sudden silence, Miguel could hear Elena's ragged breathing. They were alive, but trapped in a pocket of space that might become their tomb. 60 years this tunnel has stood, Elena said, checking her ammunition. You bring down a section in 30 seconds. David Morrison was very good at his job. Miguel examined the memory device, its surface cracked but still functional. The question is whether I want to finish what he started. Elena moved closer, her weapon lowered but ready. In the dim light filtering through gaps in the rubble, she looked impossibly young. Not the trained killer who'd executed Patterson, but the 12-year-old girl whose life had been stolen. "What do you remember about the night you chose to forget?" she asked. Miguel closed his eyes, letting the memories surface without resistance. The images came with devastating clarity. Himself in that medical chair, but not alone. A man in an expensive suit standing beside the doctor, watching with satisfied eyes as David Morrison prepared to erase himself. "I wasn't escaping the shadow cabinet," Miguel whispered. "I was protecting them. The memory wipe wasn't punishment. It was promotion. They were moving me to deep cover. So deep I wouldn't even know I was still operational." "Miguel Santos, the burned-out DEA agent," Elena said, understanding. "The perfect legend because you believed it completely. Until today. Until you walked into my cantina and started triggering the revival protocols." Miguel looked at her with something approaching wonder. "You were never meant to extract information from me, Elena. You were meant to activate me." The realization hung between them like a physical presence. 20 years of careful planning, 2 decades of psychological conditioning, all building toward this moment in a collapsed tunnel beneath Mazatlan. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "What was my real mission?" Miguel accessed David Morrison's memories like files in a computer, each one crystal clear and utterly damning. Tomorrow night, Joaquin Guzman will be in Puerto Vallarta for his daughter's wedding. Small ceremony, minimal security, family only. The perfect opportunity for his long-lost niece to approach him. And? You were programmed to kill him, not capture, not extract, execute. Then disappear back into legend, another ghost story the cartels whisper about. Miguel's throat felt raw, the ultimate weapon, a family member he'd never suspect, trained from childhood, carrying 20 years of manufactured hatred. Elena stared at the memory device in his hands. "But you remember now. You could stop it. Or I could complete it." Miguel felt the weight of impossible choices. David Morrison spent years building this operation. Miguel Santos spent 15 years running from its consequences. But maybe the man I'm becoming can find a third option. Above them, they could hear heavy machinery. The Russians were calling in equipment to clear the tunnel. They had maybe an hour before this pocket of space became a grave. Elena holstered her weapon with deliberate precision. "I need to know something, and I need you to be completely honest. When you look at me now, what do you see? The weapon David Morrison created, or the child Elena Guzman might have become?" Miguel studied her face in the dim light, seeing both versions simultaneously. The cold professional and the lost girl, the perfect assassin and the innocent victim. But underneath both constructs, he glimpsed something else entirely. A woman choosing her own identity for the first time in 20 years. "I see someone who gets to decide who she wants to be," he said finally. "Starting right now." Elena reached for the memory device, her fingers brushing his. "Then help me remember everything. Not just what they want me to know, but what they made me forget. If I'm going to face my uncle tomorrow night, I want to do it as Elena Guzman, not as their weapon." Miguel looked into her eyes and saw his own choice reflected there. Not David Morrison's cold calculation or Miguel Santos's haunted regret, but something entirely new. The possibility of redemption through truth, no matter how painful. He activated the device. Above them, the drilling began. The memories flooded through Elena like a dam bursting. Miguel watched her face transform as 20 years of buried truth overwhelmed the careful conditioning. First confusion, then recognition, finally a grief so profound it seemed to shake the tunnel walls. "Tio Joaquin," she whispered, and the words carried the weight of a lost childhood. Her hand flew to her left shoulder, fingers tracing the crescent-shaped birthmark through her tactical gear. "He used to say it looked like a moon watching over me." The drilling above grew louder, but Miguel found himself focused entirely on Elena's transformation. She was remembering not just facts, but emotions. The uncle who'd carried her on his shoulders through Culiacan markets, who'd taught her to fish in the Sierra Madre streams, who'd wept at her parents' funeral and promised to protect her always. "They took me from the cemetery," she breathed, "during the burial. I remember now. Men in suits, claiming to be federal agents. They said Joaquin's enemies were coming for me, that I had to disappear to stay safe." Miguel felt David Morrison's memories provide the clinical details. A 12-year-old girl, traumatized by loss, easily convinced that her uncle's world was too dangerous for her. The first step in a 20-year process of psychological reconstruction. "We told you he stopped looking," Miguel said quietly, "that he forgot about you once the heat died down. But he never stopped." Elena's voice cracked. "I can remember him coming to the facility where they kept me. They told me he was there to sign papers giving up custody, that he was relieved to be free of the burden. But that wasn't what happened, was it?" Miguel accessed the file, though every detail felt like swallowing broken glass. "He came every week for 3 months. Brought your favorite churros, drawings from your cousins, letters he'd written telling you bedtime stories. The handlers made sure you never saw any of it." Elena doubled over as if physically struck. The weapon that had efficiently executed Patterson was gone, replaced by a woman confronting the magnitude of what had been stolen from her. 20 years. I've spent 20 years hating the one person who never stopped loving me." The drilling stopped suddenly. In the silence, Miguel could hear voices, not Russian this time, but Spanish. The local authorities finally responding to reports of gunfire in the tourist district. The shadow cabinet's window was closing. "Elena," Miguel said gently, "we have maybe 10 minutes before they break through. You need to decide what comes next." She looked up at him, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "You created this. You turned me into a weapon aimed at my own family. Why should I trust anything you say now?" It was a fair question. Miguel thought about David Morrison's cold calculations, Miguel Santos's haunted regret, and the man he was still becoming in this buried pocket of Mexico's revolutionary past. "Because for the first time in either of our lives, I'm telling you the complete truth. No agenda, no manipulation. Just the facts you need to choose your own path." Elena wiped her face with the back of her hand. "The wedding is tomorrow night." "Yes. If I don't show up, they'll know the operation failed. They'll send someone else, eventually. But if I do show up..." She trailed off, working through possibilities Miguel couldn't guess at. Above them, the drilling resumed. Closer now, more urgent. Voices shouted orders in rapid Spanish. Miguel recognized the accent patterns of Sinaloan police, local men who'd grown up hearing stories about these tunnels, who understood their historical significance. "There's something else," Miguel said. "Something David Morrison never told his handlers." Elena looked at him sharply. "Your uncle isn't just attending that wedding. He's planning to surrender afterward." Miguel let the words sink in. 48 hours from now, Joaquin Guzman intended to walk into the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City and negotiate a plea agreement. He's tired, Elena. Tired of running. Tired of the violence. Tired of missing his family's lives. That's impossible. The shadow cabinet couldn't allow it. Guzman's surrender would mean trials, testimony, exposure of operations they've spent decades building. Miguel gestured to the memory device. "You were never meant to be an assassin, Elena. You were meant to be a tragedy. The long-lost niece who finally found her way home, only to die in the crossfire of a cartel war they'd stage around the wedding." Elena stared at him. A war that would eliminate both Guzman and any witnesses to their involvement, leaving them free to install the next puppet, start the next operation, sacrifice the next generation of children to their games. The drilling broke through. Voices echoed down from above. Mexican police shouting instructions, ordering the area secured. Real voices, belonging to real people with real names and families, not the faceless agents who'd orchestrated so much pain. Elena stood slowly, her movements deliberate. When she looked at Miguel now, he saw neither the weapon nor the victim, but someone entirely new. "I know what I have to do. Whatever you choose," Miguel said. "I'll face the consequences. All of them. It's time." Elena smiled, expression that transformed her completely, revealing the girl she might have been. "Then let's go home, Papa. We have a wedding to attend." Above them, sunlight began to filter through the widening hole, illuminating the dust motes dancing between them like memories finally set free.